compound probability. A tool that is really helpful when solving compound probability problems are tree diagrams. A tree diagram is something that organizes all the possible combinations or outcomes of an experiment. You will have a list of every single combination that experiment would give you. And compound probability is the likeliness of two or more events occurring. In our first example, we are flipping a coin and a spinner is being spun. The tree diagram has already been drawn for you, and it lists all of the possible outcomes. The sample space, right over here, is you can take and organize your abbreviation for your events that happen in the first round and the events that happen in the second round. So our first sample space would be, parentheses, heads with a blue on the spinner. Next, we would have heads with red, heads with pink, and heads with yellow. We have similar combinations for tails. So we have tails with blue, tails with red, tails with pink, and tails with yellow. And the last part, we talk about the number of outcomes from the first event. Well, the first event, we had two different options. We had heads and tails, so we had two options there. Number of outcomes from the second event, the spinner, we had four different options. We had blue, red, pink, and yellow. And all of the outcomes, well, you could count them up, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total outcomes from all of the events. Now, there is something else that you can use, the counting principle. Sometimes it's called the fundamental counting principle. If you don't have to list all of the outcomes, you can look at a shortcut and say, well, there are two events or two outcomes for the first event, 4 for the second. If I multiply those together, we know that there will be 8 total outcomes or combinations. We're going to use the tree diagram, and we are going to answer these compound probability questions. We want the probability of getting a heads when we flip the coin and landing on blue with the spinner. We look at these individually. So the first thing we want to look at is we have a 1/2 probability of getting heads, 1 head on a coin, 2 total outcomes on that coin. On the spinner, we have 1 blue space on the spinner, and there are 4 total spaces. With compound probability, we multiply those two together to get a final probability of both events occurring as 1/8. The probability of getting a tails and a red will be the same thing. We have 1/2 for the tails. There is 1 red out of 4 total spaces on the spinner. That gives us a total probability of 1/8. For letter C, tails, we have 1/2 of a probability. Now this time we want Y or B. So if I look at Y and B, I see that there are 2 spaces that will give us what we want, the yellow or the blue, out of 4. If I multiply that together, we get 2/8, which reduces to 1/4. Finally, we have tails or heads. Well, we have 2 possible outcomes with a total of 2. We have yellow or blue, which is 2 out of 4. So that leaves us with 4 out of 8, which reduces to 1/2.